Like I mentioned in my last video, the total liquidity of coins available on the market is always far less than the total supply of the coin in existence, right? So the total liquidity that's actually on exchanges is always going to be far lower, but especially true in the early days of the coin. And again, HEX is only 20 months old, so not even 2 years old. And we can make a comparison to Bitcoin at that young age of 2 right now. Obviously today Bitcoin is much more liquid than HEX because it's the oldest coin and the most mature. I mean, Bitcoin is 12 years old. It's more liquid than any other coin on the market. Any other coin, right? It's the most liquid because it's been around for so long. And now, institutions are getting in and things like that. So these kind of giant players need that big liquidity. But when you're in retail, when you're just people like you and me off the street, you don't really care about that high liquidity because it's more than enough to have smaller amounts in those early stages. And that's actually an opportunity for you to buy and sell, whatever you want to do before the big players get in. So think of it as an opportunity. But let's, again, do a comparison to Bitcoin. This is a chart from Glassnode.com. Glassnode.com does a really good job of accumulating various Bitcoin data, on-chain data, so real blockchain data that can't be faked. Here I moved it to a logarithmic price scale because some of the metrics were a little bit funky. So I moved the price to the log scale and the metric to the log scale. And what you're looking at is the total balances on all exchanges for Bitcoin, right? And then the price is in gray, but what's important to look at is the gold line or the orange line. That's the balance of Bitcoin that's actually liquid on exchanges. And we're going to go back in time to year 2 of Bitcoin's existence, right? So when Bitcoin was 2 years old, again, Bitcoin came out on about 2010, right? So let's go to January 2012. And we'll see, when Bitcoin was about 2 years old, as opposed to when HEX was about 2 years old. When Bitcoin was 2 years old on January 2012, looks like we had about 880 Bitcoin available between all exchanges, right? And that's between every exchange on the market. So there was really only one exchange at the time, Mt. Gox. And so a lot of the Bitcoin was being traded on there. So we've got 880 right there. Let's round that up to 900 just for a nice even number. And let's figure out, so how much Bitcoin was there actually total circulating Bitcoin? Well, we can go over to blockchain.com and we could find the actual total circulating Bitcoin supply at that same time. So let's go to January 2012. The closest we can get to January 1st is January 3rd. It's about 8 million, right? 8.02 million, as you can see on the screen here. So there were 8.02 million Bitcoin in circulation and only about 900 Bitcoin available on exchange. So let's do some math. 900 Bitcoin on exchange divided by 8 million Bitcoin that existed that were minted at the time. That leaves you about, let's multiply that by 100 to get the percentage. That's about 0.01% of Bitcoin that was available on exchanges at year 2 of Bitcoin. Now, obviously that metric gets more and more higher over time to where we're at today. We have, millions of Bitcoin on exchange, but in a product's infancy, when it's very nascent and new, you have a lot less liquidity than you have total supply. And that grows exponentially. That ratio, if you plotted that as a ratio, grows exponentially along with the price growth, right? So that's just proof. And even today, 78% of the Bitcoin supply is not liquid, which means only 22% is available on exchange. And that's after 12 years, guys. And this was as of, December 29th, 2020. So relatively recent. You can see over here, the blue part of the chart is the illiquid supply. Orange and red are liquid, right? So you could see this is about 2012 right here. Look at how much more blue there was than orange and red. Now, I'm not able to get that chart here because I haven't paid for the Glassnode service yet, but if I was able to share the chart, I would. But you could see it right here on the article here, right? So this is Bitcoin data. Let's hop over to look at Uniswap data. So Uniswap has 3 versions, V1, V2, V3. The primary place where HEX is traded is Uniswap V2 and Uniswap V3. So let's get some of our own data. And so I'll show you, if you go to v2.info.uniswap.org, you can find all of the V2 data. And then if you go to info.uniswap.org, you can go to find out all the V3 data. So let's do V2. Again, the top liquidity pairings for HEX are HEX USDC and HEX ETH, right? These are what mostly people trade in, okay? So let's look at the HEX USDC pair. We could see there's still 53 million 127,000 HEX on V2 in the USDC pool. Now on the ETH pool, on the other hand, we've got 10,275,000 HEX. So that gives us about 63 million total so far. Now let's hop over to V3. So if we go to info.uniswap.org, these are the latest and greatest from V3. Again, we can see that the top two pairs are USDC and ETH. Let's ignore all the other pairs for now because they're kind of negligible. I mean, they don't even have $500,000 in them yet. So let's just look at HEX USDC on V3. We can see that there's 32.5 million there. And on the HEX ETH pair on V3, we've got about 6.7 million on there. Now let's add all these numbers up and do some math. So that equals 102 million, approximately 102 million HEX on exchange today. And remember, there's about 600 billion, roughly 600 billion coins in existence. So let's divide this by 600 billion, which is a big number. And we will get this number times 100 to get a percentage. That's about 0.01%. 0.017% of all HEX is available liquid, and that's as opposed to 0.01125%, right? 0.01125%. So there's actually more, a little bit more HEX liquid at this time in HEX's existence relative to the total circulating supply, or just the total supply, let's say. So when we compare it to Bitcoin, this is actually a bigger number, right? And I'm sure that this is going to get higher over time as HEX becomes more mainstream, as we get an actual, real USD on-ramp, when we get the Grayscale-like entity. There's a lot of cool stuff coming up for HEX. So follow the news and be sure to stay updated. But you can see those two numbers are very similar, and the one for HEX is even higher. So people complain about that, and they don't really realize, I think, what they're saying a lot of times. I mean, no liquidity in HEX. I mean, even just look at HEX compared to all these other coins, right? This is the leaderboard of liquidity for all ERC20 tokens on Uniswap. We've got all the ones you've seen before, some familiar faces, and then we've got HEX at number 24. So HEX is in the top 30 for liquidity on Uniswap. So people saying it doesn't have enough, well, how much is enough, right? I mean, HEX has more than Aave, more than Matic, more than Yearn. Again, these might be traded on other dexes too, but Uniswap is the premier dex that everybody goes to. And HEX has more liquidity on Uniswap V3 than a lot of other well-known tokens, right? So it's not that low. 24 is not that low, and it's not like you want to be the highest anyway. The higher the liquidity is, the harder it is to move the price up. It takes more economic energy to move the price up. So if HEX was number one, you might not see as much price movement. So part of the volatility is part of the game, right? It's a feature, not a bug. And the more volatile something is early on, the higher the price can appreciate, and the faster the price can appreciate. But again, we can compare HEX to all these other tokens, and it really doesn't give me any cause for concern.